Dr. Todd Levine, Chief Medical Officer InCircle Review.
I'm a neurologist and practice specifically in a field of neuromuscular medicine, which are diseases of the nerve and muscle. And so I'm going to talk about a project that really we've been working on for the past 10 to 12 years. And it really has a lot to do with the fact that in neurology in particular, but in many fields of medicine, there is a tremendous amount of misdiagnosis. And so examples I can give from the field of neurology would be if a patient's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, for example, and then they come to autopsy, it turns out that the clinicians were wrong about 30% of the time. The same can be said for Parkinson's disease. And these are really important issues these days. If you follow the news just in the last week, there is going to be another medication approved for Alzheimer's disease that probably will be in the 6 figures per year times the many millions of people. And so if we're misdiagnosing patients, it really has a big impact on the medical economics of the world. And also, we don't want to be giving patients medications for a disease that they don't have. In my area, I work in a lot of diseases of, as I said, of nerve and muscle, where we use medications that often change a person's immune system as a way of treating those diseases. And these medications are very expensive. And so what became clear, and I'll show you some data, is that, again, like with Alzheimer's, like with Parkinson's, the diseases that I treat and that many doctors around the world treat also can be misdiagnosed. So this is just a brief introduction of some of the key people involved in InCircle, and I'll explain a little more about what InCircle is as we go throughout this talk. But that's myself, and my co-founder is Dr. Katz, who practices in San Francisco. Patrick Schmidt has been generous enough to fund a lot of the research that we've done over the past decade. And then Suzette and Michael and Glenn have been integral in really turning this into a commercial product. So as I said, this goes back about 10 years ago when Dr. Katz and I were actually at a meeting, and we were talking about the fact that there's this medication called IVIG, and IVIG is used to treat diseases where a person has a nerve or muscle disease causing weakness that's caused by their immune system. And it's a tremendously groundbreaking treatment that's really been around about 50 or 60 years. And what we saw was a lot of patients that were coming to our practices who had been diagnosed and treated with these very expensive medications that we felt didn't have the disease. And so we undertook a project to really try to understand across the country how often this might be true. And so to do that, we reviewed 248 patients that had already been approved by the insurance companies to receive this IVIG therapy. This came from 26 different states, 154 different physicians. And what we saw from the analysis was out of those patients, only about 32% of those patients actually had enough evidence in the records that were provided to the insurance company to say, yes, this was an appropriate therapy, meaning, yes, they had an immune-mediated neuropathy. In almost half of the patients, it was obvious by the review of the data that was provided that they had something that was not immune-mediated. And one of the things that we use, one of the tests that we use to help make this diagnosis is a test called an EMG, or a nerve conduction study. That's probably the single most important criteria to then say, we do this test, therefore we think it's a demyelinating neuropathy, therefore we think they should get this therapy. So of the 248 patients that we analyzed, only 15% had evidence on that test that actually fulfilled the criteria. And remember, these were all patients that were actually already approved by the insurance companies. So 85% of the patients that were approved by the insurance companies didn't have the most important piece of evidence to support the diagnosis. So we published that, and others did as well. At about the same time, 2 other neurologists, Jeff Allen and Rich Lewis, published very similar data from their analysis. And so what we learned was that, number one, when the charts go to the insurance company, they're often incomplete. There are many pieces of information that are missing. And they're often voluminous records that are very difficult for an insurance company medical director to really make their way through. It also is difficult to kind of integrate, as I said, that test, the EMG test, with the clinical findings and the lab results to try to get to a concrete answer. One of the reasons for that, for example, is with one of the diseases, a disease called CIDP, there's about 18 different sets of diagnostic criteria that have been published. And my usual comment is, if there's 18 sets of diagnostic criteria, it means that none of them are any good, because if you had a good one, you wouldn't need 17 more of them. And so then you end up having to kind of farm out this information to neuromuscular experts, which then becomes very costly and time consuming. Patients are waiting to get treated while many, many people have to look at this information and try to come up with the right decision. So we felt that IVIG was overprescribed, both and in both directions, really, meaning giving it to people who don't have the disease and therefore won't respond to therapy, but probably also patients that could have gotten treated and didn't because the diagnostic algorithm was inaccurate. These are very difficult disease states without a gold standard. So it's not your blood sugar's 300, you have diabetes, there's no question, we're going to give you the diabetes medicine. As I said, multiple criteria, very difficult to understand. And then also, once patients are approved for therapy, we know that there's going to be some misdiagnosis, and then therefore you need a way to reanalyze that and say, yes, this person should continue, or no, this person should not. So from that, we launched this InCircle concept, which was, could we take an algorithmic approach to analyzing the hundreds of pages of information that come into an insurance company so that we can identify the right patient and get them the right drug? This would help minimize misdiagnosis. It would also allow for transparency. So again, as a neurologist, a practicing neurologist, I will find I could submit the same information to two insurance companies, and one will say, yes, it's appropriate to treat, and one will say, no, it's inappropriate to treat. And it makes it very difficult for me. I want to know what I need to have to be able to tell that patient, yes, we're going to move forward with this treatment. And all that should happen in real time, very quickly, so that we can get the patient onto therapy. And if not, we should move them to the appropriate therapy. So what the InCircle process has done is to take all that information, put it into our algorithm, organize it, analyze it, synthesize that, and then prioritize patients in terms of who should and should not be treated. We use people right now, although we'd love to get to the ability to actually have a computer read the records. But for now, we have real people that extract that information. We put that through our proprietary computer algorithm. We've got neuromuscular disease experts to make sure that we're staying up to date on the latest changes in all these diagnostic algorithms. So for example, just last year, there was a new set of criteria that came out, and this needs to be incorporated in real time. And then we can analyze all that data at the end of it. What that brings to the insurance company is a single one-page summary that can then go back to the prescriber and say, your patient met these 5 criteria, therefore the patient's appropriate for therapy, or they did not. In the long run, we're very confident that this will improve patient outcomes and also decrease the amount that is spent on inappropriate utilization of these expensive medications. And this was a recent real analysis of 41 cases, again, from a different insurance company, different set of patients, looking at these case reviews. And so what we saw in 41 cases was that the total spend on this medication, the IVIG, was almost $8 million. Had you used the InCircle algorithm to analyze these patients ahead of time, you would have been able to decrease that to about $4.8 million with a $3 million savings. And because we were able to see the long-term outcomes of these patients, we know that we're not withholding medication from patients that needed it. This was stopping inappropriate utilization. This has potential to not just be in the neuromuscular space. We're working already in the immunology space, the rheumatology space, again, with the dementia drugs that are coming out. All these things where there's not specific diagnostic criteria, and where the push from the patients and the push from the physician is to do more, we have to have some brakes on that system. Otherwise, we will bankrupt the healthcare system in the US. And we think this is a really novel way to try to approach that.